Hi there, this is Alvin, and welcome to the Kickstart Commerce podcast, where we share search marketing and domain investing strategies to help grow your business. In today's episode, our guest is none other than Doron Vermaat, a domain investor, founder of dngeek.com, and the co-founder of FD.com, the world's largest commission-free domain marketplace. Today, Doron and I discuss how his job board expertise intersected with domain investing and development. Doron discusses how journaling about domains he bought and sold became known as dngeek.com. Doron also reveals an alarming real-life story about why domain ownership is imperative when developing a domain. And last but certainly not least, Doron and I chat a bit about what led to launching FD.com and what it means to go from domain investor to an industry-leading domain innovator and service provider. So with that, Doron, welcome and thank you for making time to join us today.
Thanks, Alvin. Great to be here on your podcast.
Certainly. So at the time of this recording, it is like 9 a.m. Central Standard Time on what feels like a week of elections that will never end. So it is mid-afternoon for you, or starting actually probably going late afternoon.
Yeah, it's towards the end of the afternoon here.
So we chatted briefly about the just about the elections in general. I kind of want to know, like, what is it like watching the elections from afar? Obviously, I live here within the States and I get day to day, hour to hour, minute by minute updates. But what is it like to kind of experience the U.S. election from afar?
It seems the whole world is watching now. Maybe I lived abroad for many, many years. So a lot of my friends made over the years, they are Americans and, expatriates and so on. So maybe in my social circle, people are a little bit more on top of following this news. But even here in the Netherlands today, I think, the 8 o'clock news definitely starts with, the US election. So yeah, the world is watching, certainly.
Well, while the world is watching, the domain world is listening and tuning in to us today. So that's the good news. And so to kick things off, Doron, let's briefly share at a high level with our listeners a bit about yourself, who you are, your personal and professional background.
Sure. So I'm basically from the Netherlands. I was born and raised in the Netherlands. I spent the last 14 years abroad, mainly in Hong Kong, where I moved initially for my job at the time, and then started working for myself. Also got into the domain industry from there. But recently moved back to the Netherlands with my family. So after 14 years, I'm back in the motherland, so to speak. Been active within the domain industry since 2012. So around 8 years now. I wouldn't consider myself like a newbie anymore. I've been around in the industry for like a few years now. Yeah.
He's been around the industry, and there's a song that says, I've been around the world and I can't find my baby. Well, might not find our baby, but we're going to talk about some good domain stuff today. So, man, what's interesting is I didn't realize that you had only been domain investing since 2012. I actually thought it was longer. So you and I probably have that about the same timeline where we entered the industry.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about 8 years, it's still quite a long time. When I entered the industry, just like always, it felt like, oh, I'm late to the industry. But if you look back at the opportunities that have been the last 8 years to kind of jump in and grow with the industry, there's still so many opportunities that there have been in the last 8 years. So I think it's never too late to get started in the domain name industry. I think the industry keeps developing every year, and there's always opportunities for new people to get started. Yeah, do well within domain names.
So then, in terms of, let's talk a little bit about your start, or rather, how you got your start. And so, prior to 2012, like, what were you doing before domain names ever come across your radar?
I've worked within the job board industry for a long time. So I think I started working for one of the largest online job boards in the Netherlands around probably 2003 or 2004. I can't remember exactly, but that's how it kind of got started within the internet industry. And that's also what brought me to Hong Kong. So when I was 24, I got an offer to start a job board for the Chinese market. And I launched the very first English language job site for Greater China. So that's kind of what I did before I got started in domains.
So job board industry, like what drew you to that? Is that just, hey, that's where available work showed up, or did you have a connection in, or kind of what's the
Um,
backstory there?
yeah, so the city I lived in just happened to be the home base of one of the largest job boards in the Netherlands. Even at the time, it was a small company. I think when I got hired into that business, I think I was one of the first 10 people who worked for that company. And in the 2 years I worked there, the online recruiting industry grew so big that by the time I left, I think that company had around 60 staff or so. And it was acquired by a very big publishing company, basically a company that mainly was invested in print. And that was pretty much around the time that the recruitment industry was shifting from print to online. So my job at the time was literally calling companies who were still advertising in newspapers and magazines, and get them to post their vacancies, their job postings online instead of in print. So that was around that time, and that company just happened to be in the city I used to live. I was very lucky to get in there as an early employee. I was just a simple sales guy. I was just on the phone all day, probably putting in like 100, 150 phone calls a day, calling companies, talking them into, hey, you should post your job online instead of in the newspaper. That's really how I got my start within the internet industry. Yeah.
Wow. So then it went from that company, then kind of what was the next stop from that company?
Yeah, so I worked there for about 2 years. So during the very exciting period of the company getting started to it being acquired by a big publisher. And after the company was bought, of course, the job was a lot less exciting. One of the biggest reasons I left was that our bonuses were being, reduced heavily. Once we were part of this big corporation. So one of my clients, so to speak, there was a recruitment company that I used to sell to, was one of my clients in my portfolio. They said, hey, we're expanding and we're opening an office in China. And since you know so much about the online recruitment space, why don't you come with us? We'll fund a job board, and you are going to run that, and we're going to do that in China. And because at that time, 2006 or so, China was pretty much on the rise, and a lot of Western companies were looking to expand into China. So our idea was, hey, there certainly must be a need for a English language job portal for all of these expatriates that are being hired and these overseas Chinese people who are in the US or in Europe who are now looking to move back to China to jump on that very fast-moving train for in terms of the Chinese economy that was booming at the time. And I got a job offer. I was 24. I had nothing to lose. It was other people's money. They funded the entire operation, and I was put in charge to kind of lead that project and take ownership of that. And instead of setting up shop in China, we actually ended up opening up our office in Hong Kong, and that was in 2006. So I was very lucky, so to speak, to get offered that opportunity. And I packed my suitcase, and a month later, I got off the plane in Hong Kong. Yeah.
And away you went with a new adventure, a new journey then.
Yeah, it was super exciting. I just jumped in, and I still remember that even my we were about to launch this English language job portal, but I remember actually my own level of English was pretty poor. So the company that hired me for this, they were like, all right, Doron can do that. They didn't know. I was very very unexperienced, and
So then
but
how did you overcome this?
just by if you're really forced to adapt, then it happens very quickly. So um, yeah,
Immersion.
I just went out there. We worked with the Dutch web development agency to build the site. We invested a lot of money into building the platform, and so I worked on that first before we moved. And by the time we arrived in Hong Kong, the site was up and running, and I just had to get on the phone and get job postings on there. So I just got on the phone. I started calling big corporations, recruitment companies, getting them to advertise on the site. And I think at one point we actually had around 60,000 job postings or so on that
Wow.
side. Yeah. But, we never got it to a point where it became a profitable business. So after about, I think, 4 years or so, that adventure ended. We basically went bust. Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Oh man. So
And
then kind of what happened there? So you guys build it up. So you get pretty much all these job postings, but from a
right.
revenue, I guess from a revenue and profit standpoint, it just never quite turned the corner.
No, I can tell you why. The Chinese market is so enormous in terms of not just the number of people looking for jobs, but also the companies that advertise. And
Hmm.
we were competing with job boards like 51 Job, Caopin, China HR, China's largest job boards, where you could buy 100 job postings for maybe $250. So that is, if you compare that at the time with the European market or the US, where at that time, early days, when you would post a job on Career Builder or Monster in the US, you paid hundreds of dollars.
Hmm.
The margins were huge in Europe and the US. In China, we were charging, I think, $40-50 per job posting, which was sometimes 20-25 times more than the competition. So we had like a super, super premium product, so to speak. But the margins were still a lot lower than in Europe. And it was very hard to compete with these large job boards who were literally giving it away, just going after volume.
So then essentially you ran it for what, like 4 years, and then it was just like you couldn't make the ends meet, or I guess the market just wasn't there for it. And then kind of I guess what happened? Like you just walk in one day and that was it, or
Well, so we had a recruitment business. The majority owners of the job board also had a recruitment business, and basically
gotcha.
that business was always funding the job board. But at one point, this was around 2008, 2009. There was on top of that a huge, economic downturn,
Yeah.
and not just in the US and Europe, but this was globally. So in Hong Kong, it was a terrible year as well. So there was basically no money to fund the further expansion of the job board business. And we had built such a complicated platform. There was no cloud hosting or anything at that in these years. So we were paying approximately $5,000-6,000 a month on hosting and web crawling and all that
Yeah.
stuff. And basically funds just dried up, and at one point we couldn't really pay up our hosting bills anymore. And that's also when the web development agency basically just put aside on. They just took it offline, and that was pretty much the end of it. Yeah.
Oh man, so you got to enter it in and it doesn't resolve, and you kind of know the story from there.
Right. Yeah. So that was kind of like the end of it, and it was a pretty wild ride. So I think we had to shut down the business. I think around 2008 or nine. Yeah.
So you shut down the business. So did you have any of the code base, the domain name, any of that stuff?
No. So
Yikes.
this is the classic mistake. It was all owned and managed by the web development agency we worked with, including the domain name. Because when we set up this company, we just said, this is how we want to name it. Can you guys please register the .com, the .net, and maybe the .cn and the .hk for Hong Kong? And they just took care of that. And so we didn't even, were the official owners of the domain name.
Would you do that today?
What do you think? No. Yeah.
He's like, not only. Absolutely not the case.
No, but at that time, it was very common for companies to just say, hey, we're going to start this online business. And you would just let your web developer take care of the domain name, because
why do you think that was the case, I guess, back then? I mean, was it really that hard to actually go out and actually purchase names during that time, or?
Not really, but just managing the DNS of a domain name. If you're not technical, it's just, I think a lot of companies, they just say, especially at this time, you would just ask your web developer to take care of that stuff. It was pretty common in those days. Yeah, right. I'd say. Yeah,
I would say, I still find it to be common, especially, I mean, if you're talking about like mom and pop shops that are out there, they're focused on doing their business. It's kind of like they're not looking at, I'm not wanting to go learn anything else, nothing else, and especially if they're not technically inclined. If they're tech challenged, it's like, no, like you all go and deal with that. Obviously, you stated the obvious downfall is that if something happens, like your company goes bust, they kind of own you. Or if you can't make payments, then they can either pull the site, they own the domain. I mean, in terms of today, how does that actually play out? Is that still something that is kind of like grave danger, or not so much?
Well, I think today, most entrepreneurs today, they know that they should own, they should be the registrant of the domain name and, have full ownership and access to the DNS. But like you said, I still think a lot of mom and pop shops, they might just, choose to entirely outsource the whole thing. Although I think that's also changing, because these days with Wix.com or Squarespace, you just go to Squarespace or Wix.com, you can buy the domain, you put up your own site, GoDaddy website builder. I think that has also changed the landscape, because back in the day, there weren't any Wixes or Squarespace or website builders. So if you wanted to go online, you had to work with a web developer anyway. And that landscape has changed a lot with these companies, that anyone without technical know-how can easily get up a website these days. Back in the days when we were started, I don't think WordPress even existed at the time. So whatever your ID was, you had to go out there and get someone to take part of the technical part of the biz. Yeah.
Yeah, because it wasn't like you said, it wasn't cloud hosting. It was straight up physical servers. That's what you were paying for. Was physical servers, and it was typically, depending on site traffic, it was typically more than one. That you were either doing some sort of load balancing or round robin type situation, to balance your traffic. But that being said, so then once that all kind of ended, kind of blown up, then I guess, like, where did you go from there, from that experience?
So this company, we shut it down, I think, 2008, 2009, around the global financial crisis. And then at that time, I've met my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and, the mother of my child. And, I've made a lot of friends. So there was no way I would pack my bags and go back to the Netherlands. I mean, Hong Kong was the place to be. So I took a job. I went to work for a company again, which was actually quite nice because I had this monthly paycheck, and I had a salary again, and it was good. I worked in executive search for a while. So I used to work for basically recruitment firm that recruits for senior executives. So I used to recruit people in the media and in the internet space. So I worked for a lot of startups to help them build their C-level team, and that was actually a great job to be in, but it was really repetitive because you have to go out and literally hunt for a company and fill a position within their firm, and then you start all over again. So you just have to, you don't really build something up. It's just like so it kind of, after a couple of years, after that I rejoined another job board, which was based out of Hong Kong, and which was called recruit.net. That company still exists. At the time, it was one of the leading job search engines in Asia Pacific. And I worked there for 4 years or so and really helped them become one of the bigger search engines for jobs in the Asia Pacific region. And during that time, I also discovered domain names as well. And in the end, I resigned from that job to focus full time on domains and building FT a few years later. Yeah.
Nice. So then, in terms of like, where was that intersection moment of you, I guess, getting bit by the domain bug?
So that was, like I said, the domain name of the job board I founded in China. So that company was called New China Career, and we had the job board on the newchinacareer.com domain name. So that domain name was registered at Network Solutions, of all places, by our web developer. And I think we had paid for that, or they had paid for that multiple years in advance. So I knew that this domain name was set to expire somewhere in 2012. So even though we shut down the New China Career business already for a couple of years, I always kind of looked up the domain name to see if they had renewed it, or I was kind of keeping track of it to see what happened with it, because this business we invested so much time and money and resources in. It had like a huge backlink profile. We had a lot of sites linking to New China Career over the years, and I always thought, hey, if they let that domain name expire, then definitely I'm going to register it and see if I can use it maybe to relaunch a simple site on the domain. So at one point I saw the domain was about to expire, and then when you go to the domain name, then New Network Solutions at the time, they put up like this pay-per-click landing page, but it also says this domain name is expired. Click here to back order it. Or basically there was a link on the landing page, and that link took me to Namejet, because all of the Network Solutions domains that expire, they go exclusively to Namejet, at least at the time. And I've never heard of Namejet. I've never heard of domains, dropping domains or anything like that. Of course, I knew domains, they expire and stuff, but I didn't know there was this whole world of expired domain name auctions and so on. So I landed at Namejet. I created an account, and I placed a back order for my own domain name, newchinacareer.com. And while I was waiting for that auction to start, I kind of start browsing around, and this whole world opened up for me about all these domains that expire and these auctions. And I still remember it really well, because on the night that the newchinacareer.com domain went to auction, I was so surprised because I was the only one who had a back order until maybe 2 days before the auction, and suddenly there were 5 and then 10, and then I still had 15 other people or so competing with me in the auction for that domain name. Probably because it had so many backlinks and so on. And I had to pay, I think, probably like $500 or so to win back the domain. But that's when I realized, hey, there's this whole world out there of people who speculate and buy these expired domains. And so I bought back my own domain name that night, but I also started buying all sorts of other domain names that I thought, looked cool and had some potential. And from there on, I discovered, the In Journal. I started to read some of the industry blogs, and that's how I got into the domain name industry. And I never stopped buying, I think, after that.
And so from one bad experience of not owning a domain, fortunately, you were able to get it back. Now, it took some years to get it, but you were able to get it back. And with it, here came a whole new career. And so how did you go about entering into the domain name industry? You hear about the trial and error investing. Matter of fact, I did a episode with a colleague of yours, Keith DeBoer.
Yeah.
And so he was talking about the trial and error investing
right
of in brandable domains. And so, like, did you just, I guess, shoot out of the gate, just buying different domains, not really knowing, or kind of what was your approach?
I think what helped me right from the start is a couple of things. First of all, I started to buy domain names at namejet.com. A lot of people who start out in the industry, they have this idea, they think they have this brilliant idea, they think of all these domain names, they go to GoDaddy.com and they start looking for domain names that they still can register at the usual normal fee. Well, I started out buying domain names at auction, and I was just looking at what everyone else is bidding on. So I think the first 100 domain names or so I bought were all auction domains from Namejet, and I was just kind of looking at what are other people buying. So there, I think that helped me a lot, because if there's 5 or 6 other people bidding on a domain name, there's at least some sort of a demand for it. So I did bought also, of course, some domains that were pretty useless, like in different extensions. And so I think I remember I picked up some .info domains and quite a few .nets. But overall, most of the domains I bought were .coms. Most of them were expired, and most of them were, in the $200 to $500 range or so. And looking back, my first purchases were, not that bad at all. And it was, so that was one factor that I consider myself quite lucky. I started out buying domains at auctions and not hand registering them. The other thing is, of course, I've worked within the internet and online industry already for quite a few years. So, and I've founded and worked for a lot of online companies. So I had a little bit of an idea about what makes a decent brand. And for that reason, also, I focused pretty much on brandable domains right from the start.
Now, did you set some kind of threshold or limit in terms of what you were willing to spend, in terms of how low you would go, or even how high?
Not really. I think, pretty much all of my purchases the first year or two were like under $1,000. So I didn't really go after really big names. What I did many years later is I did look back at all of my Namejet. What is it called? If you place a bet, you basically put on the list
back orders.
Or like a pre-bid before.
Yeah.
Anyway, anyone can put in their $69 bid at Namejet, and then you are added to the auction, right? So,
right.
Years later, I looked back at all my early back orders, so to speak, and there were all these names that I did not want, and then I was like, if I could only buy them now for the price they were, sold for back then at auction.
Right.
So I really wish I had gone a lot higher on a lot of names, but I was kind of sticking to names under the $1,000, probably like, around the $500 mark or so. And, the good thing is, like I said, I was still working full time as at recruit.net, and I was making, very decent salary.
Right.
And that is, I think, very important if you start out in domain name investing, that you don't quit your day job.
Wait, what? Say that again?
Don't quit your day job,
Wait, I thought everybody quit their day job and hit it rich, hit it big.
Man, if it was only so easy. The thing is, for me, it was just great. I had a good job, so I could say, all right, I'm going to spend like $1,500 a month on buying domains without any pressure on me to start immediately selling those or turning a profit. What you see, yeah. So, don't quit your day job. It took me, I think, 8 months or so before I sold my first domain name.
And that's what I was going to ask. Like, obviously, you went to buy, but then that's the other side of the question is, as quick as you were buying, were you also studying up and becoming a quick study rather to the art of outbounding and selling a domain? Obviously, you being in being in sales in one industry, how did that really, I guess, correlate or transfer to the domain industry itself?
Right. No, I've never done any outbound. Never. No, that's not true. I've hardly ever done any outbound on my domain names.
What?
I would just register them and then,
kind of sit back,
wait for inquiries. But I was one of the things that I stumbled upon very early was Brand Bucket, and Brand Bucket has been around for a long time. Actually, when I found Brand Bucket, I think they were already in business for 5 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
But I started out selling at Brand Bucket because I loved the whole idea of selling a brand instead of just a domain name. I loved the descriptions, the logos, and finding Brand Bucket really got me, hooked on the whole idea of, a brandable domain, selling brands. So my first couple of years or so, I was really heavily invested in listing my domains on Brand Bucket, and later also on some of the upcoming competitors of Brand Bucket, like brandroot.com, which was later acquired by Brand Bucket. So my first domain I've sold, also sold through Brand Bucket. It was a domain I bought on Namejet, and the domain name was Obria, so OBRIA.com. I think it sold for $4,000 something on Brand Bucket, and I think I paid maybe less than $100 for it on Namejet.
Wow.
Yeah. So it actually sold for $4,696 on Brand Bucket. Yeah.
And what was your first thought when you got that first sell?
I actually still remember it. I think everyone does, right? Your first sale. I think everyone remembers that. I think I went out to walk my dog and then just walked out the front door, looked at my phone, and then I got the email that says, congratulations, your domain xxx.com sold. And, even now, after having sold quite a few domains, who doesn't love that email, right? When you wake up or when you just check your phone, those are the best emails to get.
Certainly. Now, in terms of domain investing, like, I guess, because you sit in an interesting seat. So obviously you're a domain investor. You're also the founder of dngeek.com, as well as co-founder of FD. Now, obviously you had that first domain sale, but I guess how did you make the jump from domain investor to actual publisher of dngeek.com?
So pretty early on, I stumbled upon, when I got into domains, I just spent hours and hours just researching. And so I found name pros. I found some of the sales reports from DN Journal, but I also pretty quickly stumbled upon domaining.com, which is like the aggregated, news feed for the industry.
Right.
And I started just absorbing all of these blogs every day. I was just reading all of them, and because I think that's the best way to learn. It's just when you get started in the industry, read the blogs, get onto the forums, read. Domainsherpa.com. I watched that for months of my life, watching Domain Sherpa, because when I got in the industry, there was already hours and hours of content on there. But I read all these blogs and I thought, why, maybe I should just start one myself. And I didn't really do that for others. I thought it was great just for myself to kind of more like as a journal. So yeah, I went out, I got a domain name. So I got dngeek.com and I put up a WordPress site and I just started to write about the domain names I've bought and later on the domain names I've sold. And it started out really as a bit of a personal journal and to document my journey within the industry. But pretty quickly people found the blog, then I had it included on domaining.com, and that way a lot more people started reading it. Yeah, that's really how I got into publishing. Yeah.
So then, how did you score dngeek.com? Was that a hand-reg, third-party purchase?
The thing about it is it was definitely used before. I think I might have gotten it on the drop. Let me just see what I've paid for it. Because I'm actually just now kind of looking into my FD account, and then I can quickly see what I actually paid for the domain. And it was definitely a hand registration because I paid less than $10 for it. But I still remember that when I launched DN Geek, there was something strange with the domain name, because if I posted a link on it on Twitter, it was blocked. The site was blacklisted somewhere, and so later on I did some digging, and then I actually saw it was used for something else, domain related. But I think the previous owner did something a little bit dodgy with it, because it took me probably around 6 months or so before I could actually share links to the sites on social media and so on. Yeah, so it took me a little bit to clean up the domain, so to speak. Yeah, but I did register it on the drop, but it was used in the previous life. Yeah.
And so you go from domain investor to publisher. And then now, I guess in terms of what is the size of your domain portfolio? Has it been something that's been consistent over the years, or have you had high highs, low lows? Kind of where are things at there?
I always used to be around like 500 domains or so, mainly .com. Then probably like everyone else, my portfolio increased significantly during the Chinese boom, because I had probably like a few hundred letter number .coms, or these domain names that everyone was kind of hoarding during the time that the Chinese were buying all these pretty worthless patterns. But that was just a short period of time. I dropped most of those after that market completely crashed, and then my portfolio was kind of back at the same level, so around 500 or so domains. Currently, it's more because I started to diversify over the last 2 years, and I've invested quite heavily in .io and .co domain names. So currently, I'd say my portfolio is a little bit under 1,000 domains, with about half of that being .coms and the other half .io and .co.
Now, why'd you diversify or choose to diversify in .io.co?
One of the series I posted on DN Geek for many years was like a weekly list of newly funded startups and their domain names. So I used to, every week, I used to publish like an enormous list of newly funded startups and their domain names. and I would analyze that. So I would write a post and say, 74% of these startups is using the .com. This many startups is using alternative extensions. I was kind of keeping track of how many of these startups is using one of the new GTLDs. Spoiler alert, not many at the time, and still not many startups are using the new GTLDs. But one thing I did see was that a lot of startups were using a .co or .io, and that number only increased and increased over the years. So I was like, hey, there is a market for that. And then I think I met a fellow domain name investor, Nicole Zangri, who's from London, and he has a really large .co portfolio. And we spent a lot of time talking in Vegas. We had dinner together, and he's very successful within .co. So after meeting with him, I really, decided to invest more heavily in that extension, as well as start buying more .io domains, and that paid off quite well for me. I've seen. So this year, 2020, has been my highest grossing year in terms of revenue from purely my own domain name portfolio. And that is in part, because I really diversified, because a lot of my larger sales these years were in these alternative extensions, .co and .io.
And so you still, it's not that you don't buy .com, but it's just that, like you said, you diversified outside of .com, and I guess you'd say kind of settled your portfolio a bit with .io as well as .co.
Right. I mean, now I'm kind of at the point where I say, hey, I want to add more .coms to my portfolio, especially because I really invested heavily in .co and .io because I think they were undervalued. So right. You could really, if I would spend $1,000 on buying a .co.io, I could get a better name than spending that same $1,000 on like a pretty average .com. But so many investors are now also focusing on .io and .co that I'm kind of looking, hey, maybe my money is more valuable again in purchasing .coms, because a lot of the good .co and .ios now, they go for thousands of dollars also at resale. Yeah. So those prices have skyrocketed, and I'm sitting on a really, really good portfolio of one word .ios and .cos already. So my focus now is a little bit more on .com again. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Well, wrapping up then, let's talk a little bit about kind of what led. So you did domain investing there. So you started down that path, and then obviously that got you to DN Geek. Now, what led to FT?
So FT was born out of a need I had myself. I think I was investing in domain names for about 2 years or so, and I tried out a lot of different solutions. So like I said, I was a big fan of BrandBucket, but I couldn't list all my domain names there. Maybe at the time only 1 out of 10 got accepted, and so I had all these other domain names. So I tried parking them. So I used Parking Crew, and then I started looking at other services that I could use. But what I was really missing was a solution in the market that kind of could help me keep track also of my my expenses, like how much have I paid for my domain names, how much have I sold them for, what are my monthly renewal fees. I basically had no idea at the time if I was making a profit or if I because you always remember the sales, but you right. kind of tend to forget everything that hasn't made you a profit, right? So, and of course there's Excel, but I hate Excel. I'm not good in keeping track of all that stuff myself. So I was kind of looking for a solution that I could just kind of input my domains and keep track of all those things for me. Plus, I was looking for a solution where I could put up a for sale landing page that didn't have any, pay-per-click ads. And at the time, there wasn't that much in the market. So that's when the idea for FT was born. Luckily, one of my best friends at the time, he was back in Holland, I was in Hong Kong. we were kind of looking for an excuse to hang out more often. And, because he was living in Amsterdam, I was living in Hong Kong, and we were like, wouldn't it be cool if we have this excuse to kind of, just jump on a plane and see each other a few times a year and, do fun stuff. And then we were like, oh, let's just start a company. And I was like, hey, I have this idea. And that's how FT was born. So we started building FT, I think, in 2014. I think we launched in private beta in the beginning of 2015 or so. Yeah.
Wow. And by that time, obviously, you had built DN Geek to pretty much it was a recognizable brand and still is a recognizable brand within the industry. And so that kind of paved the way for you to I guess you'd say have a test or a group of people that you could put FD in front of. I guess it just went from there.
Right. Yeah. So DN Geek was started really not, I never had, the goal to make money by publishing. Because the industry is so small, it was more
Right.
like documenting my journey. But in the end, once you have a readership, then if you create a product for that readership, then actually you have this great vehicle to promote the product you've built. So I've built up the perfect readership audience to then tell them about FT. So yeah, I definitely used DN Geek in the early years to also promote FT a lot. And when, like I said, I always wrote about domains I sold. And then once we had FT, I could tell people, okay, I've sold it. I used, this landing page. And it was a great way to kind of promote FT. In the early days, for sure. Yeah, I think
Right.
it was a big part of that.
And so really it goes from this conception of a landing page that offers portfolio analytics and management insight. And then you just turned a corner recently, I guess not too long ago, prior to this recording, of really becoming a marketplace, right?
Yeah, so we've started I see there's a whole new chapter for FT. We still offer all the features that our users love us for, and we will continue to do that. But we now have a consolidated marketplace as well. So lots of added exposure to our sellers' domains as well, and it's a really excited chapter that
Right.
we're starting. Yeah.
So I guess then, in terms of FD, just in terms of being that marketplace, obviously that is commissions free. Now, I guess do sellers have the option of opting into that or opting out?
Yeah, so FT sellers they are completely in charge of their portfolio, and you can opt out from listing your domains on the consolidated marketplace very easily from within your account, or you can simply say I want to have a private seller profile, so no one can see which domains are yours. So yeah,
Gotcha.
users are in full control. We're not forcing anyone to have their domains listed on that marketplace at all. No. Nonetheless, we've only seen a very small percentage of users opt out, but we feel it's important that we don't enforce anything on our users, because the power of FT is always that you're in charge. We don't charge commission. We don't have access to your data. You pay us a monthly fee, and we see ourselves more as like a hosting company for the domain name industry, instead of a marketplace that has any incentive to be between you and a buyer.
Mm. Now, does FD, do any, is there any outbound marketing strategy in terms of, because obviously when we think of marketplace, one of the first questions is, well, how is FD bringing buyers over to its platform? So is there any outbound marketing strategies of any sort that are going on that, would be appealing to sellers who may be looking to join FD?
Right. So at the moment, we don't do any outbound marketing for FT.com, but we have a pretty exciting plan for 2021 in terms of how we are going to bring additional exposure through this marketplace for our sellers. Yeah.
Yeah. So you gotta wait. You gotta wait to see what's gonna happen then. No spoilers here. Interesting enough. Well, man, last but not least, I guess wrapping up, like what would be your advice to someone, entering into domain investing or development? Like where should they start?
Well, don't get into development if you don't have a commercial or technical background. I mean, a lot of people they're great domain name investors, but normally I advise against developing if you're looking to invest. Developers are very different than investors, in my opinion. If you have a great domain name, developing it is not automatically going to increase the value, because if you do it poorly, it might actually decrease the value of the domain name. So I would only develop. If you really have a long-term plan to build a business, like Peter Askew selling like onions, or like a job
or
board,
even yourself.
So
because you did redevelop that domain. Now you got it back, and you actually did redevelop it, right?
My old job board domain, yeah. So newchinacareer.com is now developed again, and it's running on full autopilot with a very low hosting bill. But
and registered in your name.
Yeah, it's registered in my name. The funny thing is, it's still with Network Solutions. Because,
Come on, Doron.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah, and every year when it has to be renewed, I say I want to transfer it, and then Network Solutions say, "Wait, are you sure?" And then suddenly you can renew it for only $10. So instead of paying the $30, I just keep it there. Otherwise, you have to change the DNS.
Right.
But no, my advice for people who enter the domain name investing industry, which I think is just something completely different than domain development. I think if you start with investment, just get started with reading. Head over to domaining.com. There's a great list of resources there. Domainsherpa.com is a terrific free resource. And for those who say, I'm willing to invest in like an accelerated path to domain name investing and invest in a bit of education, DN Academy I think is a great way to start in today's market. And don't start spending on domains until you have a bit of an education there. So I know it's really difficult. Once you find out about the domain name industry, the first thing you want to do is just start buying, right? And another thing is, don't, because it's very tempting to say, oh, I'm just going to start and I buy the cheap domains because then I don't spend a lot, I don't risk a lot. But it's a lot better to say, buy a domain name where some other people are bidding on. It doesn't have to be the domain names that go for many hundreds of dollars. But if you buy domains that go for $250 or so, and there's some other people bidding on it, you know at least there's some sort of a demand. So buy domains that other people want to buy too. If you get started.
And I tell people oftentimes about that, because a lot of times I just know listeners are out there. So what you're saying is, if there's one more person and we get into a bidding war, that's okay. Or if there's two more people and it's like, nah. So, I tell people oftentimes, I'm like, look, if you probably have a better chance if there are at least 4 to 5 people plus yourself bidding. Versus the 1 or 2 people, because you just don't know if you're bidding against a bot or you're actually bidding against someone else.
Yeah, and just don't buy new GTLDs.
Are they still new? Like I know, because even myself, I still call them new GTLDs, and I'm like, geez, like it'll be a decade and we'll still be calling these things new GTLDs.
Yeah, don't buy most of the alternative extensions. You can do well in some of the alternative extensions, but it's better to branch out there once you get yourself familiar and have some success in .com.
Well, last but not least, is there anything else that you'd like to share with listeners, how they can get in contact with you, or how to get started with FD? Anything?
Well, for FT, we We offer like a free 30-day trial, so anyone can just head over to ft.com, sign up for a free trial account. If you want to reach out to me, email is always the best way. It's Doron, Doron @ft.com. Happy to answer any questions or help you get started. And
Yeah, man. So with that, we're out of time. So Doron, thank you again for joining us today and sharing your domain investing journey.
My pleasure, Alvin. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, and thank you, listeners, for tuning in to Kickstart Commerce, where we share search marketing and domain name strategies to help grow your business. Please subscribe to this podcast via iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, or Podbean. Last but not least, please visit kickstartcommerce.com to subscribe to the newsletter sharing tips and tricks about the disciplines of digital strategy. Thanks, and that's all for now.